Okay, well, welcome back. Welcome back. We continue our session, and now I'm honored and pleased to give the floor to Dr. Alex Grigorієвс. Alex has had an illustrious career. He was among members of Latvian parliament who voted for Latvian independence back in 1990, right? Am I correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So Alex has participated in many events of world historical proportion. And one of his colleagues during one of the conferences I also had an honor to attend once said about Alex that he's very good at moving unmovable things. Speaking more sociologically, Alex is a change agent, and he's good at bringing about change. And today, Dr. Grigorієвс is going to talk about Eastern Central Europe as a field of study, and I think it is really important. Alex, the floor and the mic are yours.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you very much for I have a dog here. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this conference. I must also say that every day I follow events in Ukraine, and that my heart goes out to the soldiers and people of Ukraine, and I hope that their victory is going to come soon, and that the horrible aggression that Russia has started against this country and its people will come to an shameful end. I will add a little bit about my background, because this is where I come from with this proposition of taking Eastern European or East Central European studies as a separate area of studies that has, I think, been neglected lately, and which should be revived. Tell me if I'm mistaken in that, and I hope to have your reaction. So my background is indeed, well, my academic background is in the study of literature, and so is my doctorate is in theory of literature, and mostly sort of the literatures that I studied were written in Latvian, English, and Russian. But also I have interest for literatures for the countries where I worked, other countries than those mentioned. And these other countries were Ukraine, and I do think that Ukraine has great contemporary literature, also related to the war that started in 1914. I mean, in 2014. I'm sure about that in 1914 as well. So in these countries, I worked as a representative of NDI, National Democratic Institute, that is, as an implementer of development assistance programs, and in that sense, I was trying to bring about change, and also my background and current work is very much in journalism, in mostly in Latvia, but not solely in Latvia, and that is that also gives a slightly different perception. And so why do I think so that this is important topic, the sort of Central European studies, or studying Central Europe or East Central Europe, and that is that the name comes up all the time. We refer to it without thinking of what exactly we're referring to. And we're referring to Eastern Europe, Central Europe, or East Central Europe. East Central Europe is probably the most sort of geographically precise term. And also this terminology is always contested. For instance, and I think it's also not a chance fact that it has been contested. For instance, every time I mention that Latvia belongs to Eastern Europe, there would be somebody in the audience saying that no, we are Northern Europe. There is a reason and the reasoning, the logic behind this, but and then there are numbers of questions, legitimate, I think, questions. Is Finland, for instance, part of Eastern Europe, or East Central Europe, to be more precise? My reference to Eastern Europe is actually sort of betrays my Soviet background, because I grew up in the Soviet Union when Latvia was occupied by the Soviet Union, which I didn't know when I was growing up. So we refer to Eastern Europe to everything that was west of the Soviet Union, but wasn't NATO. So Eastern Europe, or wasn't the Western Europe. So Poland was Eastern Europe for us in the Soviet Union, but we were, like the Soviet Union, which was not quite Europe, although geographically, as you know, it's different. And the next sort of issue is are the Balkans part of Eastern Europe? And again, there are lots of questions about that and issues about that. But why are these questions and issues and the concept itself important? I would argue that all the biggest wars and two of the world wars, and we don't even know how the current war would develop. In a way, it is already a world war, or at least a war with a global importance, as some of you have demonstrated already in your interventions. So the first started, which I have already mentioned, in 1914 in Serbia, and started in Bosnia and Herzegovina by the terrorist act there, but and then Austro-Hungarian Empire issued an ultimatum to Serbia, and then other countries started joining the events. So this is the area where World War I started. World War II started with two predators, the Soviet Union under Stalin and Germany under Hitler, dividing the state of Poland. And the interesting part is that the official line of both countries at that time was that by dividing Eastern Europe, because it was not just Poland, but also other countries that sort of fell to either Germany or the Soviet Union, including the Baltic states, and that these countries considered that they are establishing foundation for permanent peace, or at least a peace that would have extraordinary longevity. For instance, I, as a child, we had a book. My father was a history teacher, and we had a book, political vocabulary, sort of explanation of political terms in Russian. And the book was published in 1940, before the Baltic states were occupied, but after Poland was divided. And I remember very well from my childhood reading these articles on Poland, because they say the language of this article reminds me of Putin's speeches today. Only Stalinist authors referred to Poland, and Putin and people around him, you know, like the clique that is in charge of Russia now, are referring to Ukraine. And all these sort of, that this is a patched up state, that this is artificial country, artificial nation. Everything was sort of was already there, only referring to Poland. So it's like, so it's not something that is Ukraine specific or Poland specific. It's excuse me. It's more something that is probably Russia specific, or that can be the Russian rhetoric that they use in and can use in reference to any country, at least any country of the East Central Europe. So there's the shameful sort of acts of President Macron and Chancellor Scholz when they are talking to Putin and sort of trying to establish some kind of red lines, and you know, and the legitimate limits to Russian interests and so on. This is all bullshit, because these legitimate interests and red lines keep shifting. So I wanted to quote this vocabulary, the political vocabulary. Yeah, the political vocabulary actually said, now that the frontier between the legitimate interests of Germany and the Soviet Union are marked and sort of on the ground, their foundation for permanent peace in Eastern Europe has been created. Well, that permanent peace held less than a year from, well, or a little bit more than a year. But actually, I would suggest, regarding the events, the occupation of the Baltic states in June 1940, and the occupation of Bessarabia as parts of World War II. You know, like Germany was doing its own war, in other territories, like attacking France and I think Scandinavia, and Soviet Union was sort of attacking the countries on its own borders. There is also, how am I with time? Yeah. So the big now we've I think we've established, or I have tried to establish, that the actual borders of what is East Central Europe are shifting, and I think that Finland may have escaped this area, but maybe not. But the period when it was attacked by the Soviet Union, it very obviously demonstrated that it's part of this territory. So and many authors refer to the actual historic events, and they should, I think, be viewed as a commonality, as something that is that has regularity about it, and the fact that that Finland has been attacked by Russia and is afraid of being attacked again, and that's why it is turning to NATO for protection together with its neighbor Finland, is proof that Finland does belong to East Central Europe, culturally, historically, politically, and militarily. The fact that they applied together, and both countries, it's been policy in both Finland and Sweden to view themselves as militarily as in one entity, but it hasn't been viewed in the same way in Russia. And generally, when reference is made to the neutrality of Finland, I must remind you that the Soviet Union has never recognized the neutral status of Finland. So by default, the Soviet Union has, through its existence up to the very end, held its claim towards the territory of Finland. The official Soviet formula was that Finland was a country that adhered to the policy of neutrality. So Finland was a neutral country, but Sweden was a neutral country according to the Soviet official doctrine, but Finland was a country that adhered to the policy of neutrality. So which was different and could be changed at any moment with a different government and so on. If we start discussing, so what is part of this territory? The big question is also, is Germany part of it? Because there are very many sort of maps and ideas that Central Europe or East Central Europe is a territory that includes Germany. There's more to that meets the eye historically. After the Napoleonic Wars in the 19th century, all those or most of the little dukedoms and kingdoms of Germany, which was not united at that time and did not form the second empire, the second Reich. So they were, in a way, vassal states of the Imperial Russia. I remember very, very interesting but I think correct reference by Alexander Herzen, Russian revolutionary and thinker of the 19th century, who described these statelets as that they don't even know that they or they're not aware of the fact that they are governing their little countries by grace from the Russian emperor. Well, and indeed, once there is a revolution anywhere in Central Europe, anywhere sort of to the west of the Russian Empire, Russian armies would come to suppress it. Well, the most sort of vivid example, of course, is one in Hungary in 1848, and where sort of the bloody suppression of that Hungarian revolution and independence war was carried out by the armies of Emperor Nicholas I, and who had this nickname, the Gendarme of Europe. So Russia has some very good nicknames. One is this Gendarme of Europe, and another is Prison of Nations. So it still is. But because of the defeat of the Russian Empire in the Crimean War, I think it started in, or was it, or did it end in 1858? Well, anyway, the second half of the 1850s.
56, 53 to 56.
53 to 56, thank you. So it ended in 56. So it was due to the defeat of Russia and its diminished European influence that the countries of Germany could be united. That the policy of the Prussian government and its Chancellor Bismarck was successful in uniting all the German states into one empire. And it ended with the Franco-Prussian War, because France that sort of controlled the Kingdom of Bavaria didn't want it to become part of and felt threatened for a good reason. Felt threatened by this project of united Germany. I would argue that the unification of Italy in a sort of semi-revolutionary way with Garibaldi, and although he worked for the Piedmont kingdom there, but has also been possible because of the defeat of the Russian Empire, because any kind of revolution was anathema to the ears and eyes and arms of Nicholas I and the Russian government. well, the defeat in the Crimean War has also done a lot of good for Russia, but that is another topic. So I would argue that because of the unification of Germany and forming of this empire, the Second Empire, Germany is not part of East Central Europe anymore. So I would describe then the East Central Europe as everything that is between Russia and Germany. In the north, the country is Finland, that I think sometimes becomes part of Eastern Europe, of that kind of Eastern Europe. And in the south, I think we can go all the way down to Greece, including all Balkan countries except Greece and Turkey, because Turkey was an imperial power in itself there. So what we can study this area, or should study this area historically. That sometimes when these powers, Germany or Russia or both, were not very strong, they some kind of institutionalization of East Central Europe was possible, and big and powerful states formed. This is the Hungarian kingdom before the Ottoman conquest, and this is definitely the Polish state, Rzeczpospolita, until it was divided by Russia, Austro-Hungarian Empire, or Austrian Empire at that time still, and Prussia, by these three countries. There are attempts, well, in this sense, events of that took part with the breakup of the Soviet Union and Russia's sort of end of influence in many ways in these territories was extremely important. So the notion, the geographical notion, and the institutionalization of East Central Europe has widened. I mean, the political institutionalization, creation of states of Ukraine, Belarus, and sort of Poland has become much more a free country finally. I'm sorry, phone calls, and what we're seeing now, to me, is also extremely important, and that is the attempt of Russia to reinstate its influence in these territories. And how far will it go? As far as the line where it stopped. So it's not like you cannot say that this is the line of its legitimate or not legitimate. I think none of that is legitimate interests. It will stop where it will be stopped. I must also say that there is an understanding, a certain degree of understanding in the countries, within the countries of East Central Europe, that it would be much stronger if it institutionalized and organize its own influence. Because each country by itself, even the biggest countries, Ukraine and Poland, are not strong enough. And they cannot totally depend on the help of other countries from outside the region, as the experience of Poland in World War II and the experience of Ukraine, as we are now talking, demonstrate. To a certain extent, they can depend on the assistance of other countries from outside the region, but not entirely. And it would make these countries much stronger if they institutionalize and institutionalize their sort of their alliances. And so we hear a lot about the Visegrad Group, the Lublin Triangle, the Craiova Initiative, and so on. So this is tendency number two. Tendency number one is to sort of is negation. We are not Central Europe. We are Nordic Europe, or we are Balkans, or we are something else. And the second, and I think this is the reaction, instinctive reaction of trying to escape the problem area, sort of not to define ourselves as part of a problem area. And the problem is that it's not strong enough. These countries are not strong enough to stand for themselves alone. And second, of course, is that other countries that are much stronger want to either conquer them or sort of subdue them or control them in some other way, in some way. Right now, this country is Russia. And the second tendency is institutionalizing through like Visegrad Group, Lublin Triangle, the 3 Cs initiative. It has a history, and this history of trying to institutionalize. The history, I know most of it from Poland, the Intermarium, this Trimarium, Trójmorze, the sort of maybe indeed that the Polish leadership in this sense is the most important, but that has to be studied. But I think that it is extremely important, also because of the Polish leadership in the during the Soviet domination period, when they created these ideas of when Giedroyć, for instance, created these ideas of the Eastern European Brotherhood, and especially the whole concept of friendship and cooperation between Poland and Ukraine. There is Polish leadership to it, but I agree with my previous speaker, that there's never enough. So, and I think that other countries, including my own country and other Baltic states, could also provide leadership to this, instead of running away and saying we are Nordic countries. That won't help when the Russians come. I think, yeah. What kind of a study could that be? You know, there is what I like, the German term Landeskunde. You know, like the research of the land, and it could be anything from ethnography to social anthropology to history. And I looked up translations. So Google translated it as cultural studies, which I loved. And but I think it should be, you know, like area-specific history and politics, including I would say literature, because in these countries a lot of history is history of nation building of these nations, and in the nation building, literature had paramount importance. This creating of a national myth. I agree with Benedict Anderson and his sort of idea of imagined communities to a point, that a nation has to imagine itself. But I disagree that it continues as an imagined community. Once a nation has imagined itself, it continues as a real community. And I think that such reality belongs also regionally to East Central Europe, with all its different languages and different histories and animosities in the past and present, but it has to be overcome. And I'm a strong supporter of institutionalization of this Central European identity and this East Central European identity. And I think that we can sort of take what are these characteristic features of this identity, and within the European Union, for instance, East Central Europe, part of East Central Europe that is already in the European Union, are all strong, no, last sentence, are all strong supporters of the leadership of being allies of the United States. I think that is a common feature and correct one. Okay, thank you very much. I think I've finished. If there are any questions, I would be glad to answer them.
Thank you, Alex. Questions, comments from our participants, especially given that it's been a pure coincidence, but we have some sort of mini panel representing two neighboring Baltic states, Latvia and Lithuania. Yes, and both Alex and Dovile have been involved with the United States as well. So it's again pure coincidence, but quite interesting one.
Very good.
Questions? Yeah, Dovile, go right ahead.
Thank you so much for your very interesting presentation. I have always been very intrigued by this question about the Baltic states belonging to quote unquote Eastern Europe or East Central Europe, or whatever term we use. And I think when it comes to the Baltic states, it's very interesting that Estonia has always asserted its Nordic identity. And Lithuania kind of was, I guess, saying, oh, we are kind of Central Europe. And then Latvia was saying, well, we are true Baltic states. But the question that I have for you is, I'd like you to comment on the opinions that we have been hearing recently that this war, Russia's war against Ukraine, has redefined the borders of the region. And some people have argued that there's no more Eastern Europe left. Presumably that Eastern Europe would include Russia, and then there's this region that would be Europe without Russia. So my question to you is, in your eyes, how has the war in Ukraine affected our imaginations of the region?
Well, I think it's a bit too early to say. My sort of main point is that that East Central Europe is Europe. Whereas in the sense that Russia is not. Although Russia is also Europe, but in a different sense. And that's why I think it should be, you know, like looked into and said and pronounced. You know, like if we take the Huntington, you know, like divisions, I think they are important, but they're important not as a dogma, but as something that has to be debated and studied, and the actual application to the actual countries. And those actual countries are Belarus and Ukraine. The extremely interesting, you know, like if your study of the specific existence of, let us say, Eastern Orthodoxy in Ukraine and in Belarus, you will, if you study it, you will see that it has been functioning in a completely different manner than further east, than in Russia. I do not know Byzantium well enough to sort of to tell you which country is more representing this Byzantine tradition. I suspect that probably Russia, because in the lands of Ukraine and Belarus, the religion was self-organized, and the main actor was a parish or brotherhood, or so basically it was organized from bottom up, whereas in Russia almost everything is organized from head down. So I think this war, which hasn't ended, unfortunately, and we don't know when and how it will end, but it will require a lot of rethinking, and I think a lot of more attention to these countries, the countries of what I think is East Central Europe. Because I think that on the part of our Western colleagues, we have seen a lot of hubris when they were not willing to accept our ideas. And I remember that very well. You know, like I'm, you know, like for, you know, probably at least 25 years, I'm trying to speak about the dangers that Russia presents to the world, definitely to the free world. And my warnings have always been shrugged off in various auditoriums of political scientists, of military scholars, as coming from somebody who is from the Baltics. Well, because I'm from the Baltics, I know it better than you do. Because I've had this history and I've had this experience. And look at my name, it's Russian. So I know what we're talking about. You know, and especially with Germany, I've had this experience when, you know, when I was, I remember, I think it was in 1915 when I was talking, you know, in a conference organized, at a conference organized by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, which is foundation of the Social Democratic Party. And I said that, you know, that Russia should be recognized as an aggressor. And, you know, like immediately, the representative of Friedrich Ebert Foundation stood up and said, no, Russia is a partner. We have to involve Russia, talk to Russia, not alienate Russia. You know, like Russia has alienated a good piece of Ukrainian territory already in violation of all international law, and before that it had alienated a territory of Georgia and territory of Moldova. So so not viewing Russia as an aggressor was hypocrisy. There is a lot of this hypocrisy still, you know, like in this "Don't humiliate Russia" slogan. I think shameful slogan. Well, I don't know whether I've answered your question, but I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions, comments? Okay. Okay. Alex, thank you. Thank you for your excellent talk. And now,
thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us and supporting us in our conference. And now I'm really delighted to give the floor to Professor Довиле Будріте. Довиле is a professor of political science in the United States, and she's an expert on Baltic states and their politics. Довиле, we are honored to have you. Thanks for coming, and the floor is yours.
Добрий день, thank you so much. And I'd like to share my screen if at all possible.
Оксана, прошу розділити екран. Оксана в нас адміністратор тепер. I'm talking to the person running the show. Оксано, поділіться екраном.
It's all right. I mean, I can talk without the PowerPoint. I had an image, but that's all right if it's not possible. I very much would like to thank the conference organizers. I have immensely enjoyed the conference. I have been listening to very interesting presentations for several days already, and I have learned a lot indeed about the world systems theory and also the practical aspects related to war. It's very, very interesting. So I'd like to probably also come back to some of these ideas as I share my insights with you. My presentation is entitled Feminist Perspectives on the Study of Armed Conflicts and Their Aftermaths. What do gender theories tell us about the past, present, and the future of warfare? So I think that one thing that I'm trying to do in my presentation and my work is to actually think about the ways in which the war in Ukraine has made us scholars, including feminist scholars, to rethink our work, to rethink our insights, to rethink our approaches. All right, so I know that feminism has so many different meanings, and sometimes it's a controversial term, right? But basically, when it comes to feminist perspectives, and I will be primarily looking at feminist perspectives in international relations, is that feminist scholars, they study gender and the ways in which states are gendered. The simple questions would be, in many cases, where are the women? What are they doing, right? How are the concepts of masculinity and femininity presented? And again, feminist research has established a very strong record, I think, especially when it comes to the study of war. And I think, in my opinion, I think that very much we will see some of the insights of feminist perspective rethought after the war in Ukraine. So I'm very happy that I can share the presentation already, and I'd like to again I hope it will make it easier to follow some of the ideas. All right, so I tried to relate the insights of feminist theory to the topic of this conference, which would be the world systems theory. And as I was doing a little bit of digging, I realized that feminist theories have already contributed quite a bit to the critique of world systems theory that very often makes gender invisible, right? And we talk about states, we talk about historical developments of states, so we talk about the core, the periphery, but in all of these discussions, gender is invisible, right? So very briefly, feminist theories made women in development visible, and starting with path-breaking work of Esther Boserup from 1970s, what feminist theories did, they basically argued that these impacts of modernization, specifically these efforts for development, have had very different effects on men and women. Women traditionally, especially in the periphery states, have had different access to resources such as education, and that definitely affected their status. And again, when talking about the core or periphery, we also need to pay attention to what's going on within the state. What are the hierarchies of power within the state? And also, the other two insights I thought that were essential when talking about feminist theory and thinking about the world systems theory was that feminist scholars have shown the centrality of women's labor to the operation of the world system. Again, very often unpaid labor is ignored. And again, when it comes to contributions of women, their labor is essential to making sure that the system is continuing, system is going. And then feminist scholars also very much asked us to pay attention to the role of culture and cultural norms for economies, for societies. So needless to say, again, when it comes to feminist theories, they have had a major contribution to theories in international economy, and that was where world system came into account. But also feminist literature and international relations have had a big impact on the study of war. And what I'd like to do in my presentation, I'd like to briefly review those insights of feminist theories and see, how can they be applied to specific cases. I'll share some of the insights from my own research on gender and war in Lithuania's anti-Soviet partisan war, and also I will offer some insights, preliminary insights about the current war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So when it comes to feminist literature and international relations, one thing to perhaps highlight is there's no one specific coherent feminist perspective, that there are multiple feminist perspectives, and I'd like to highlight there's several of them. So liberal feminists argue that it is essential to promote gender equality through liberal reform. It's essential to support women in the so-called non-traditional positions. And when it comes to the study of war, one of the big insights of liberal feminists would be that women are very capable warriors. And if, again, given a chance, they will contribute greatly to the to warfare, and their contributions should be respected, right? So from the standpoint of liberal feminists, again, there's nothing wrong with women soldiers, women participation in war. In fact, those contributions should be respected. Standpoint feminists, or they are also known as different feminists, very much still look at women and men as different. Here, when it comes to the study of war, those contributions of the so-called difference feminists would be that somehow the assumption is that women are more peaceful, if you will, than men, and they argue that we should look at the contributions of women in conflict resolution, right? So here, if you are looking at different cases, the attempts of mothers of soldiers to try to promote some kind of peace, that's the focus of the study of these feminists. And then there are what I call feminist critical theorists, or in some cases you see them as referred to feminists, postmodernists, post-structuralists, right? There are different ways to call them, but here they're very interested in the ways in which our ideas about gender is constructed. So the most important insight of feminist critical theorists would be that gender roles are fluid, contextual, arbitrary. And when it comes to the study of war, right, they would very much be interested in the ways in which our ideas about women's participation in war, women's active participation in war are created. So one thing that I would like to definitely put forward for discussion, and perhaps this is one of my hypotheses about the ways in which the war in Ukraine will change the theorization about women in war. I think that recently, one of the major contributions of feminist perspectives in IR would be to challenge this erroneous assumption about women in peace. Here, there's work referring to women as beautiful souls, as women being more inherently peaceful than men, right? But again, growing body of feminist literature on war and colonial wars, right? Many of which are hybrid wars in which we have huge involvement of civilians in war, right? We see that women play a major role in these wars, and their contributions should not be obscured, that they can be active fighters. And it's actually, again, to see women as more peaceful than men actually makes the study of war more difficult. Feminist literature in IR, also when it comes to the study of war, we focus on the study of war as experience, right? It's very, very important to look into the lived experiences of individuals, not just strategic points, right? But what are indeed people feeling? What are they going through? And by doing that, by asking the question about war as lived experience, feminist scholars bring the so-called everydayness to the international, right? So basically forcing us to rethink international relations to include important everyday details into account, right? Another insight we have somewhat controversial from feminist literature is that women actively kill in wars, and this is nothing to hide. This is a fact, and this is something that, again, should be included into theorization of war. And also, given very important contributions of women to war, their experiences must be taken into account about war, right? So when stories are written about wars, women should not be excluded. And also, it's extremely important to include women into post-conflict security arrangements, right? So this body of literature on women and war suggests that what happens very often after the war, even though women have played a major role during the war, is that their voices are silenced and they're not actively included into making of post-conflict security arrangements, right? So one of the contributions of feminist literature would be to draw attention to this fact and again, highlight the importance of women's contributions, right? A lot of work, and Laura Sjöberg is definitely one of the major feminist writers on women and war. She's saying, why do we have still these issues of having a problem somehow highlighting women's active participation in war? Why are so often women are excluded from post-conflict security arrangements? She's saying basically that across different societies, right, there's this very prevalent idea still over and over again that somehow women are not supposed to be violent, right? Again, for feminist scholars, an increasing number of feminist scholars, this is an erroneous assumption, right? And especially if the war comes to your country, right? It's, again, it becomes quite an important development that not only men, but also women defend the country and get engaged in the war as active combatants, right? So feminist literature basically identifies, theoretically speaking, Linda Hall does that, how are women in war conceptualized, right, in mass media and society. The most often used metaphor would be women as victimized objects. Women are presented as a weaker party. Women are presented as often as refugees, and they fall into this women and children category. And this is not to say that suffering is not happening. It's happening on a very wide scale, right? But however, by doing that, by constantly representing women as victimized objects, we are obscuring women's contributions to war and war making. The other metaphor that's very often used when talking about women's participation in war would be women as heroic subjects. And these are women who fight on the right side, and they merely do their job, right? But because they are women, their contributions are seen as heroic. The other kind of metaphor, which is related to women's active participation in war, would be women as monstrous abjects, right? So these are bad women, women who fight on the wrong side of the war. And these are, in the case of US engagement recently in different wars, would be women terrorists, right? Who are just monstrous, and their involvement in violence simply cannot be comprehended using the reason. Right. So having looked at all of these theoretical insights in this very interesting and growing body of literature on women and war, or gender and war rather, let me talk about some specific cases. And I'd like to draw your attention to some of my own work and make it relevant again to today. My own work focuses on women in anti-Soviet war in Lithuania. And I'd like to mention here that in 2014, this war in Lithuania became very, very salient again. That was after the Russian invasion of Ukraine and occupation of Crimea. We saw in Lithuania this emergence of uncertain sovereignty. This can happen to us as well. And then going back to history, going back to a remembrance of the period in 1941 and then after World War II when this war took place, right? And since 2009, I was very interested in actually talking to women who were active participants of war. I was very much interested in the ways in which they shape memory. And one surprising thing that I saw in my interviews and also saw in testimonies and also memoirs is that sometimes we would see women, especially when they were talking, emotions such as anger manifesting themselves, right? So here you see a quote from Aldona Vilutienė, who was born as Sabaitytė. She was a messenger, partisan messenger. She was active in a very prominent district. And it's important that after Lithuania regained its independence in 1991, she established the first museum focusing on the partisan war. Right? If we look at her official statements, we would never see such raw emotion, right? But again, if we look at her testimony, if we look at her memoirs, right, she actually talks about how angry she felt and that she was indeed ready to kill. On the other hand, there's the other side of women in war, and here I also talked to Elena Žilvitienė, who was born as Aleliūnaitė. She was also a partisan messenger, and she very willingly adopted this identity of a nobody, right? And she was unwilling to talk about her experiences for a very long time. She said whenever somebody would call me from Šiauliai, this is a city next to which she lived, she would say, I'm a nobody, don't talk to me, talk about male partisans, right? And in a sense, this supported for a very long time this narrative in Lithuania for several decades that, again, these women did not really play a major role in the war, and only recently it started to change, right? So what do we know? Again, this war was, the anti-Soviet resistance took place in 1941, before the start of World War II. And then after World War II, there was a fierce resistance from 44 until 53, right? So only recently, Lithuania's historians and also politicians started to acknowledge this major contribution of women. And if we are asking the question, what do we know about women's participation in partisan war, we would actually know that quite a few women, about 5,000 women, were active participants, right? So the numbers are fluid. There were many more women who were supporters, messengers, etc., etc. It looks like out of those 5,000 women, again, there would be several hundred who were actually combatants, right? So in a sense, they were still primarily engaged in supporting roles, but there were women who were fighting for their country with as active combatants. Their role, again, interestingly, during the first 2 decades of Lithuania's independence was obscured. Nobody talked about this, and only recently, I think, with changing gender norms and increasing interest because of the war in Ukraine in the past, we're actually starting to remember these women, as you can see, who were equals with men in, and at least as shown in the picture. In reality, obviously, their status was not equal, but we're fighting in the war, all right? So some of the insights from my work about women in war in Lithuania, there were women, not very many, but there were some, such as the Lithuania, who were memory activists, who after Lithuania regains its independence starts working on memory to create this paradigm of fighting and resistance. they very much follow Lithuania's nationalist ideology, right? If you look at their memory work, there's nothing there about women having to be more peaceful than men, nothing like that, right? They very much support this fighting narrative that was created in Lithuania after Lithuania regains its independence. There were tensions within, if we look at women's experiences, testimonies, and also public collective discourses. In public collective discourses, dark aspects of war, such as betrayal, such as misogyny, are not represented, but sometimes they do emerge from their oral testimonies. And again, if we look at and listen to women's stories about war, we see complicated realities of partisan war, and we see war as a protracted trauma, right? That the war doesn't end in 1953, that the coattails of war continue for decades to come. So here, again, I'd like to offer some very preliminary, perhaps, insights, drawing on my work, drawing on feminist theorization about gender and war into the current war of Russian aggression against Ukraine, right? So I think that it's becoming increasingly clear that women are active participants of this war, and women are playing multiple roles. Those roles stem from engaging in the war of words with the Russian soldiers, taking down drones, volunteering, and needless to say, also playing roles in active combat. It's interesting to look at, how has mass media in the so-called West has covered women. And even though, again, the coverage focuses still very much on strategic aspects of war, I would not say that women have been invisible in this coverage. Here, probably the words of Olena Zelenska definitely were very powerful when she said that our resistance has a particular female face. And I think that especially during the initial stages of war, not necessarily in the mainstream media, but there were some cases in the mainstream media as well, but also in social media. What I'm seeing in this war is that women, again, are becoming images of brave resistance. And there's something very psychological, I think, about resilience when we see women actively participating in war and society supporting their choice. One of very interesting remaining questions, I think, in the case of Ukraine would be how will active women's participation in this war affect societal development after the war is over? And here, the record is mixed, right? I mean, if we look at the cases of the United States, the cases of the UK, feminist scholarship suggests that women's participation in war, women's contribution to the war effort actually helped them to gain additional rights and promoted societal equality after the war was over, right? So I usually, when I teach American government, I give a very specific example how women contributed so much to World War I in the United States, and then they got the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1920, right after the World War I, after they showed that they contributed to the war effort, right? So active participation in war, again, could be, interestingly, especially during the post-war period, kind of a great equalizer of societies, right? And it remains what's going to happen in Ukraine. On the other hand, if we look at the findings of feminist scholars from the global South, right, very often they talk about the exclusion of women from post-war security arrangements. So let me conclude by offering some preliminary remarks, some summary of what I have been trying to do in this presentation, right? So I try to revisit again in the background of the war going on, feminist perspectives in international relations And those feminist perspectives, again, what they do, they draw attention to centrality of gender for understanding the war and its aftermath. And as I argued, what I'm thinking that the war in Ukraine will do for this body of literature is that, again, this erroneous link between women being associated with peace will increasingly be challenged. I think that also from various case studies, including, as I mentioned, the case study of Lithuania and needless to say, the case study of Ukraine, we definitely see women being as active combatants and also after the war is over, active memory makers, right? That they shape their memory, they have a say in the ways in which society remembers the war, right? And again, looking at the theories, but looking at the cases, we see this kind of tension between visibility, women's visibility and invisibility after the war, right? If women's contributions, especially women being heroic subjects, right, sometimes are very visible during the war, in the immediate aftermath of war, this declines, right? But hopefully this will be avoided in this case. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you for great presentation, for great ideas and fantastic contribution. And now, traditional round of questions, comments. Not at this point. Okay.
I think I see Alexander Korol has a question.
Oh, great. Go right ahead.
I have a question. So I understand your point, what you want to explain to us and other, but maybe I understand feminism in another way, but where's feminism here? Just I understand the idea that women takes part in a war, they are part of it, not only as victims, but as soldiers and so on. But for me, feminism mostly connected with sometimes fighting with, first of all, oppression and fighting for liberation of women, for emancipation and so on. And if we thought about women in war, for me, the main example maybe, and how it shows the war with patriarchy and other, it's example with women in Kurdistan, in Rojava, where they really fight against the patriarchy with archaic, different Islamic and so on things, whereas real radical feminism, real emancipation and so on. But because here I didn't see the idea of emancipation. Where is emancipation of women here now and in Lithuania and so on?
Right, and again, I think one of the main ideas, one of the main concepts that I try to argue is that when it comes to feminist theoretical perspectives on war, right, there are at least several ways, right, and there's feminism as a theory, right, feminism as a theory in international relations and feminism as a political movement. And you're absolutely right. If we're looking at feminism as a movement, as a social movement, right, there's always this idea of emancipation, of patriarchy, right, and that there must be a way to break down the patriarchal norms, right. Feminism as a theory, again, in international relations, would ask us not necessarily, there's definitely also an emancipatory element in that, right? That, again, in the eyes of many feminist scholars, not a single country yet has reached full equity, full equality for women, right? Not even, Scandinavian countries. So there's a lot of work to be done in that area if we're looking even at the practical level. But if we're looking at the theoretical level, right, I mentioned those different ways of looking at war. So, for example, liberal feminists, and they do work on not just, countries such as Lithuania, Ukraine, but also even on women in, let's say, the US military, right? And they ask the question, is there full equality, full integration of women into the militaries, right? And I understand, and I know that in Ukraine in 2018, I believe, women were fully integrated into the military, right? But again, there are still probably some of the remaining issues and some of the room for improvement. Again, when it comes to feminist critical theorists, and that's where I draw on their work when looking into the ways in which memory about the war is constructed, right? So they look at the constructions of gender, right? How would be the image of a woman? How would be the image of a man constructed? And I would try to do in my work, I try to also suggest that there are certain ways that images of men and women are constructed during the war and also after the war, right? So in my answer, I'd like to once again argue that there's a difference between feminist theory and feminism as a social movement, feminism as practice. Sometimes they do overlap without any doubt, right? But in my presentation here, I was trying to draw on feminist theories on war and see how they apply to specific case studies.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a complicated question, so I try to do my best to offer at least some preliminary ideas.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions?
Yes, please. Yes.
Sure, go right ahead, Alex.
Yes, my question is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, very good. So my question is, I hope it's related to the topic. The abundance of sort of monuments and the concept in general of Mother Ukraine, you know, like Mother Latvia, specifically in monuments, you know, like is it a typically Soviet concept? This kind of Mother Ukraine, well, Mother Ukraine actually is quite a belligerent monument, but I grew up with many Mother Latvian monuments where Mother Latvia is mourning the death of her children's soldiers, most often sons. How would you comment on this image and its political usage, basically?
This is definitely a very interesting question, and I would definitely like to, you know, do a little bit more digging and research on this, right? I think that it's not, I mean, if I just kind of some preliminary ideas about it, I think that this linking of, you know, land with mother, right, mother figure, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a very, you know, quote unquote Soviet phenomenon, right? If we look at, you know, other cultures, right, there's always, again, this kind of, even, you know, going back to political theory, Western political theory, right, such as linking family, including mother, to the state, right? I think it's not necessarily just a Soviet thing to do. But in that sense, also here I would argue that what you are pointing to, right? I mean, pointing to also various shades of meaning, right? And again, that a woman, when associated with motherland, right? On one hand, you could argue that, you know, she must be protected, she's vulnerable, etc., etc. But as you correctly pointed out, there could be an image showing a very strong woman, which is also, you know, ready to protect herself, right? So I think answering to my to your question, I think that again, there's a variety of images associated with women and war. And in your question yourself, you suggested that women can definitely be also seen as defenders, not just victims. And I think it's important to keep in mind these various images when thinking about women in war. Sorry, I'm not answering your question directly, but I think it would be very interesting to actually look at, conduct case studies of various cultural images and monuments, right, of how women are represented. There are such studies done, right, but specifically, you know, I'm pretty sure that there are women associated with motherland and suffering, not just in the so-called Soviet Union, but also in the West as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And now I'm extremely pleased and honored to invite our last but not least speaker today, Professor Marek Rimza. Marek, you have the chance to conclude our conference, to wrap it up with your talk, with your ideas. And I guess it's really important, given your multidimensional background, both in the realm of academia and in the realm of politics, well, policy making. So thanks for joining us, and the microphone and the floor are yours.
Thank you very much. I would like to present some slides, so I will use the technique opportunity. Is it okay?
Yes, it is downloading.
But it doesn't. Okay, it has to come from the very beginning. I don't know.
Yeah, everything's fine.
Okay. I would like to share with you some reflection and some recommendation about how to organize support for the refugees, taking into account one specific feature of what's going on now in Poland, that we organized some kind of a mass support programs without refugee camps. That's the point. And my position is that I'm a sociologist by training. I work at the university in Warsaw when I specialize in a field of analyzing public policy programming and implementation, but at the same time, I serve as an expert for the Polish president. I'm an advisor and the chief of the Council for Social Affairs. It's a group, 16 people group of experts in social policy area. And to tell the crucial point of that define my perspective as a person from the university, I try to explain how it was possible to react in such a way, and as a person who is involved in programming public policies, I try to think how to do it, how to shape it in a way to face the challenge and not to organize such camps in the future. At the beginning, let me give some three figures that characterize the situation. 3 to 1. 3 million of refugees have crossed the border between Ukraine and Poland after the beginning of Russian Federation attack on Ukraine. 2 million Ukrainian refugees still stay in Poland because the 1 million, it was divided in those who decided to go somewhere else to the third countries. Some of them decided to come back to Ukraine. So we have 2 million, more than 2 million on a board now. And we also have, and it is an important element, 1 million Ukrainians, which were and are, let me say, economic migrants. So those who came to Poland before the aggression of Russian Federation to work in Poland. So this is 3 to 1. And what is the characteristic of this Polish model of support? First of all, it was immediate opening of borders for refugees. We just did it at once. Second element is a kind of efficient relocation of newcomers around the Polish territory. And what is crucial were decisions about where to put myself, my family, are kept in the hands of refugees. So no one is asked to go somewhere. Everything is offered, and you decide what to do with these offers. You may relocate around the territory of Poland. You may go to the other countries. You may come back to the Ukraine and comes to Poland once more. Everything you decide by yourself. The third element is that just at once near the border, in locations, we organized some kind of a first support centers. Then we did the same in all big cities. And these centers are organized in such a way that it is administrated, they are administrated by local governments in cooperation with state administration, but the activity is based on the engagement of common people as volunteers. And it works in such a way that people stay in such centers not for a long time, but then they are able to move themselves somewhere else. And the fourth point I put in a title, that in such a situation, there is no necessity to open refugee camps. But having no refugee camps were not the aim of the, let me say, of the policy. It is the, how to say, the effect of the points 2 and 3 that they are working. And this first part of my presentation is a way to explain why and how does it work, how it is possible to have it. In my opinion, the main factor is what can be called as an ability to activate a kind of solidarity-based mobilization capital. This is a kind of a capacity we as a society really have, and we are able to activate it and to use it. Why do we have it? And it is a kind of a result of the experience of our solidarity movement 1980-1981. It was this kind of societal experience was based on 3 main characteristics. First, that the phenomenon was that in that time, it was a communist time. It was the total, let me say, control of the state on the citizen behavior. But during that time of solidarity movement, 1.5 years, we were aware that public sphere belonged to us, to the citizens. So we may organize ourselves in a way we think it is, let me say, correct. It is, and the second was a kind of a moral consensus as a, let me say, power to mobilize in a special situation. This what can be called as a being solidary with. And the third was a kind of an inclusive character of this of that movement. Every citizen were welcome to join the movement. Altogether, it was 10 million people as a members of the solidarity movement. So it is more than half of the population of working people in that time. And we have the same now in Poland. All these 3 points. Public sphere belonged to citizens. What does it mean? That it was people themselves who start this, let me say, kind of a support. These centers were created in this way that people came just from the streets, from homes, and start to organize some kind of a support. Public administration people came and asked common people how we can help you, not the opposite one. The second is a kind of a moral consensus on why we need to activate this, let me say, being solidary with, nowadays with Ukrainians. And the third element, this inclusive character. Everyone is welcome. We had a strong polarization inside the Polish society. It is the phenomenon of current times, because such a polarization is not only characteristic of Poles. It may be observed in other countries. But this action, help to Ukrainian refugees, is something which is very much inclusive. Everyone is welcome, everyone may come, and it is completely not important what do you think on other things. Whom you support, whom you not support. That's 3 points are, let me say, very similar to those what we observed more than 40 years ago. Something. Additional factors. Poles understand the Ukrainian definition of situation. We are able to put ourselves in the, let me say, the situation of Ukrainian people, and we understand what's going on. Poles also share the opinion that Ukrainians are, let me say, active in defending their country, and because of that, they are fully entitled to receive support from the neighbors and from the global community. The third element is that communication between Ukrainian people and Polish people is relatively easy. It's going on, let me say, in a working way. And the fourth is the group, this population of 1 million migrants, Ukrainian migrants staying in Poland, coming before the war, because they were, let me say, accepted by the Poles and may serve as a kind of a mediating structure between the society and the newcomers. It is a very important role they really play. I have some difficulty with slides. I don't know why. What is the specificity of Okay, sorry for that. What is the specificity of such a solidarity-based mobilization capital? First of all, such a capital works during limited time. So probably without any kind of reshaping, it will, let me say, finished in such a way. Secondly, this ability of mass mobilization is a special, let me say, in special situation, is a part, let me say, of something what can be called as a cultural DNA of the Polish society. Why? Because we had an opportunity to train it. It was beginning during this, let me say, solidarity movement time. But then we practiced from time to time in a similar way. I will give you two examples, not to make the story too long. For instance, in 2005, when the Pope John Paul II died, more than 1 million people just decided to participate in funeral ceremony and just move themselves to Rome. What is crucial that it was not planned before. It was just the decision of one day. Yes, I would like to join, and just 1 million people went. Similar situation we have in, for instance, 2007 in sport area. Our famous ski jumper Adam Małysz, he won a lot of competition, but then stopped. The history was stopped. He lost one by one, and one day, just at the end of the winter, he won the tournament on Saturday evening in Planica in Slovenia. And we realized that if he would be able to win once more on the next day, on Sunday, he would receive, let me say, a special award of the ski jumper number 1 of the year. And thousands of Polish people just moved themselves by cars to Planica. It was completely unpredictable. And and Slovenian people told that on that night, on this road to Planica, there was just only Polish cars, a crowd of Polish cars. Just people came, Małysz won, they came back home, switch off this, mobilization, and then start to live a normal life. We can do it. We are, experts in this field. What's the problem? Is that we are not the experts in what can be kind as a ability to convert such mobilizing social energy into the longer term societal activities. You had not opportunities to train it. Now we have a chance, but we need some public policies to support this process. So to shape the grassroots initiatives in a way to channelize social mobilization. So in my opinion, the main challenge in programming public policies nowadays is how to develop the Polish model of refugee support to normalize the activities on one hand, but on the other, without losing its societal-based character. How to do it? And this is what I would like to share with you. Let me say that I'm not active in politics. I am the high-rank expert in a field of of the policy, not the politics. These are, let me say, some kind of 5 recommendations that may be presented from, let me say, such a standpoint. The first recommendation is to institutionalize social capital. So, to organize public policy programs in such a way not to replace common people activities by public administration involvement. It is rather policies to channelize these social activities, to help people to be active in a longer perspective, not only in short, let me say, time of extra mobilization. Second recommendation is to implement through public policies rather packages of solution in different areas, for instance, education, labor market, social welfare, whatever, rather than to choose the best solution and to push it to work. Why? Because if you had such a package of solutions, you are able to sustain empowerment in hands of the common people of both sides, common Poles and common Ukrainians as refugees to decide by themselves what to do. And people as a whole do not follow one idea. They decide in different ways. And the public policy has to, let me say, to organize such a sphere for decision of the common people. The third recommendation is to prefer social services which are organized within local communities rather than in isolated institutional centers. It is not only the story about the refugee camps as, let me say, macro institutional centers. It is also about micro or meso, organize the support within communities. Such a, let me say, such an approach follow the EU agenda, what is called as a policy of deinstitutionalization. It means to, let me say, prefer environmental social services as much as possible. The fourth recommendation is to organize support practices with the principle of sharing responsibilities. So that is not that one person, one family, one public institution, on whoever is responsible to organize the support. Sharing, let me say, responsibility is to keep sharing responsibility is a way not to organize the support in such a, let me say, isolated way. And let me say that such social capital of being able to share responsibilities is, in my opinion, much stronger in the Polish province than in big cities. So we have to use it. Currently, the Ukrainian people prefer to stay in such a location as Warsaw, Gdańsk, Wrocław, Rzeszów, so big cities. In my opinion, the situation will be developed in a way that smaller localities will be chosen more often. I think it is, let me say, it may be rational and effective. The fifth, to use the capacity of Ukrainian communities of migrants and refugees in implementing programs addressed to newcomers. A kind of a win-win strategy. And partnership model of cooperation. And the sixth, that we have to include Ukrainian refugees as participants of, let me say, universal type public assistance programs. And the rule of, let me say, a special program targeted as those the programs for Ukraine has to play some kind of a complementary role and not to be, let me say, as a main approach. Let me say that all these 6 points we put in a kind of the recommendation presenting to our president. And to tell the truth, I just received the SMS to meet with the chief of the President Chancellery as quick as possible. And we have such an informal rule in the Chancellery that all, let me say, issues connected with the Ukrainians has to be done in this way at once. So let me say I cannot stay with you so long time, only maybe 10 minutes, not more. Sorry for that, but it is, let me say, it's a situation of such a person who tried to, let me say, do both, to be active as an academician and also to be active as an expert. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Marek, and we don't take too much of your time, and we are really grateful to you for what you have been doing to Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees. It's of utmost importance, and it's extremely noble. So we are really grateful to you for this. Maybe some quick questions, but again, very quick, since Professor Rimzа has to leave. Okay, no question at the moment, but again, thank you for everything, and good luck in your endeavors. And we are grateful to you and Poland as a country, as a nation, for all that support Polish state and Polish government, Polish NGOs, local government, civil society have been giving to Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees in particular. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a good day. And that brilliant speech concludes our today's plenary session. I'm extremely grateful to all the keynote speakers. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your speeches. Thank you for your ideas. We should all stay in touch and carry on. As I've said on a number of occasions, this is the 10th conference, so life goes on. We will roll on, and I hope for further collaboration with all of you. Thank you, and have a good day, and goodbye. Now you can stop the recording, and we can stop the session. Thank you.